The financial trick that bankrupted the British Empire in 1945, May 8, 1945. The streets of London were a torrent of celebration. Churchill stood on the balcony, and the world declared victory over Nazi Germany. The British Empire, the great global power that once controlled a quarter of the Earth's surface, had prevailed. This is the story they want you to remember. It is a lie, a glorious historical lie, because in the shadow of that great victory, a far more devastating war had already been lost. Britain had defeated the Axis powers on the battlefield, only to be defeated by its own allies in the vaults of Washington and New York. The true surrender was not signed in Berlin. It was signed in a ledger book. By the time the champagne corks stopped popping, the British Empire was already bankrupt. Not just broke, but crippled by a single catastrophic financial trick played by its greatest friend. This is the moment the sun finally set on the empire. Not because of a military failure, but because of a debt trap that the same forces are setting for today's superpowers. This trick was not a minor accounting error. It was the calculated decades-long outcome of the financial war of the 20th century. We are going to expose the exact mechanism, the precise clause, and the moment in August 1945 when a stroke of an American pen turned Britain's scarce victory into its eternal insolvency. If you believe your government's economy is stable, if you think debt is just a number, you need to understand this story. Because the tactics used to bankrupt the most powerful empire in history are the same tactics currently being deployed against your nation, against your savings, and against your future. This is the hidden history of money and power. For 6 agonizing years, Britain was the front line of democracy. But that freedom came at a price no nation could pay in full. A relentless, astronomical price. By the end of the war, the cost of Britain's war effort had obliterated its financial existence. The British Treasury had to liquidate over $4.5 billion worth of overseas assets, gold reserves, foreign investments, and ownership stakes in companies worldwide, just to buy essential supplies. This was the equivalent of selling the family jewels to pay the butcher. By 1945, the nation's foreign exchange reserves were exhausted, drained to a critical point. The empire was, in essence, operating on fumes and IOUs, but the true danger lay not in what they spent, but in what they owed. Their domestic debt alone had ballooned to over $24 billion, a truly staggering sum for the time, representing over 250% of the nation's GDP. This was a debt held by its own people, yes, but the deeper, more immediate threat was the sterling balances. This was the hidden, immediate financial bomb. The key to Britain's survival was the Lend-Lease Act, a program conceived by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It sounds altruistic, America lending supplies to nations vital to its defense, but this was no gift. It was the ultimate strategic mortgage. The Lend-Lease Act allowed Britain to receive crucial materials, destroyers, aircraft, food, raw materials, without immediate payment. However, it came with a chilling set of financial covenants. Britain had to agree to conditions that ensured the eventual dismantling of the preferential trading agreements that underpinned the entire British Empire, imperial preference. In exchange for survival, Britain was forced to concede its economic future. The United States was not just funding an ally, it was strategically buying out its competition. The small print was lethal. The very act of taking the aid was the first step toward bankruptcy. Every crate of supplies, every new tank was an additional nail in the coffin of the empire's commercial autonomy. The US knew that the only way to establish the dollar-S supremacy was to destroy the sterling bloc-S supremacy. Lend-Lease was simply the financial Trojan horse to achieve it. Then came the trick, the single most catastrophic financial maneuver in modern history. The Japanese surrender on August 14, 1945, VJ Day, should have marked the start of rebuilding. Instead, it triggered the Financial Execution Clause. The terms of the Lend-Lease Act contained a little-known, devastating provision that allowed the president to terminate the agreement instantly upon the cessation of hostilities. And that's precisely what happened. Within 72 hours of VJ Day, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9619, cutting off all Lend-Lease aid to Britain. This was not a slow wind-down, it was a financial guillotine. Imagine the scenario. Supplies mid-ocean were ordered to turn around. Thousands of crates on docks were suddenly labeled COD, cash on delivery. Britain, with its treasury empty, its credit maxed out, and its economy entirely geared for war production, was told to pay cash for everything, immediately. It was a move of pure, calculated ruthlessness. The greatest debt trap in history had sprung. The total bill for the supplies already received or in transit was $25 billion, the inventory of war materials. The message from Washington was clear. Victory is yours, but the bill is now due. This instant termination was the trick that truly broke the empire's back. The instantaneous cutoff plunged Britain into an immediate and existential liquidity crisis. They had no dollars to pay for the oil, food, and raw materials needed to transition back to a peacetime economy. But the situation was worse than just a lack of dollars. Britain had accrued massive sterling balances, debts denominated in pounds owed to nations in the Commonwealth and Empire, such as India, Egypt, and Australia, in exchange for their wartime services. This debt alone stood at £3.5 billion, about $14 billion. These creditors, knowing Britain was now broke and unable to replenish its gold reserves, demanded payment. The once mighty pound sterling, the foundation of global trade for a century, was suddenly seen as worthless paper. Britain faced a terrifying trilemma: no dollars to buy basic necessities, an exhausted economy that couldn't produce exports, and massive sterling debts that threatened to collapse its entire imperial trading bloc. The financial trick of the immediate cutoff had successfully created a perfect insolvency event. With no other choice, Britain had to crawl to Washington for a loan, a financial surrender that surpassed any military defeat. The result was the Anglo-American loan of 1946. The loan was a total of $3.75 billion, a colossal sum, but nowhere near enough to cover the immediate $25 billion bill for Lend-Lease goods. But the money wasn't the price. The conditions were the price. The financial iron fist, the U.S. Treasury, led by Secretary Fred Vinson, demanded two things that would permanently dismantle the empire's economic structure. Condition 1. Full convertibility. Britain had to agree that within 1 year, the pound sterling would become fully convertible into US dollars. Any nation holding pounds could instantly cash them in for dollars. Condition 2, the end of imperial preference. Britain had to agree to eliminate the protective tariffs that favored trade within the empire, opening up the entire Commonwealth to American goods and financial penetration. This was the real strategic victory for the US. The convertibility clause was the trap. When it was enacted in 1947, the world's creditors, fearful of Britain's weakness, initiated a massive run on the pound. They converted their pounds into dollars at a staggering rate, draining Britain's reserves further and forcing the immediate suspension of the clause just 5 weeks later. The attempt to restore the pound failed, and the dollar's ascendance was cemented. The British Empire did not fall to Hitler. It was systematically foreclosed upon by its own allies. The loan guaranteed one thing: perpetual debt. Britain only made its final payment on this debt in 2006. Think about that. 61 years of national revenue dedicated to paying a bill for a war they won. The terms of the loan ensured that the British economy would be subordinate to the American-dominated post-war order, the Bretton Woods system. The empire was structurally bankrupted, forced to relinquish control over its trade routes and its currency. The gold flowed out, the dollar flowed in, and the sterling bloc was dissolved. The great empire became a satellite economy, forever shackled by the debt accrued in the moment of its greatest glory. It was the 1945 financial trick that sealed the deal, demonstrating that in the New World Order, military victory was meaningless without financial control. Now look at today's world. The US is the current global superpower, holding a national debt that dwarfs that of post-war Britain. The question is, who are the new creditors? Who holds the $90 trillion in global sovereign debt? Nations like China, sovereign wealth funds, and, most importantly, the global central banks. What trick, what catastrophic clause or sudden demand will they deploy when the moment is right? The US is currently funding its vast military and social spending with massive debt, just as Britain did. The lesson of 1945 is terrifyingly simple. The moment your creditor decides the war is over, or the moment they demand immediate convertibility into gold or a new global currency, the collapse will be instant. The financial hammer always falls on the most indebted superpower. It is not a question of if, but when and how. The financial trick is being prepared again. The history of empires is a history of money. Don't be fooled by flags and generals. Follow the debt. Subscribe and turn on notifications now to join the community that tracks the true power dynamics of the world. We are exposing the financial traps they set for you. The British Empire fell to the dollar. What will the dollar fall to? In our next video, we dive even deeper into the darkness to reveal the ultimate source of wealth hoarding. The gold conspiracy that ended the Romanov dynasty. The price of gold, the secret vaults, and the cabal that determines who lives in luxury and who dies in poverty. Click on the next video now. Don't let their financial tricks blind you. Demand the truth.